"No more charity cases," her father said, Mafia boss Smirked, "then I'll be her only fortune." The rain in Greybridge was not the kind that washed things clean. It was a heavy, industrial drizzle that coated the city in a sheen of gray oil and reflected the neon lights of the skyline like a blurred, broken mirror. From the 24th floor of the Hale Enterprises Tower, Lena Hale watched the water streak against the floor-to-ceiling glass. It was a barrier, thick and cold, separating her from the world below, a world she was supposed to be helping but could barely see. On her desk sat a check requisition form for $50,000. It was a staggering amount of money for most people, enough to feed a family for a year or keep the heat on in a shelter through a brutal winter. But Lena knew exactly where this money was going. It was earmarked for the Hale Foundation's annual beautification project, which meant planting imported ornamental trees in the median strips of the financial district. It would look excellent in the quarterly report. It would do absolutely nothing for the homeless veterans sleeping on the benches beneath those very trees. Lena signed the document. Her hand did not shake, but her stomach twisted with a familiar, quiet nausea. She placed the pen down with deliberate precision, aligning it perfectly with the edge of her notebook. Control was her armor. If she was perfect, if she was meticulous, if she was quiet, then she was safe. Her office door opened, and her assistant, Sarah, poked her head in. Sarah was young, bubbly, and terrifyingly oblivious to the tension that permanently knotted Lena's shoulders. "The floral arrangements for the gala have arrived," Sarah chirped, holding a tablet against her chest. "They are lilies, just like Mr. Hale wanted." "Oh, and the caterer needs a final head count by 5 o'clock. You look tired. Lena, you work so hard." "I am fine," Lena said, her voice soft and even. "Just finishing the final approvals." Sarah sighed, a sound of wistful admiration. "You are so dedicated. Honestly, every time I see you working this late, I think about how lucky you are. To be adopted by Richard Hale? To have all this? It is like a fairy tale. Lucky." The words scratched at the inside of Lena's throat. She forced the corners of her mouth up into a polite, practiced smile. It was the smile Richard had paid for with years of orthodontics and etiquette lessons. "Yes," Lena said. "Very lucky." When Sarah left, Lena turned back to the window. The reflection staring back at her was a pale woman in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back so tightly it made her scalp ache. She wore a gray blazer that cost more than her first foster mother had made in a year. Lucky was the word everyone used. They did not know about the cold draft in the hallway of the foster home on 4th Street. They did not remember the smell of boiled cabbage and mildew, or the way 6-year-old Lena had hidden under a bed when the social workers came, terrified of being moved again. They did not know that when Richard Hale, the titan of Greybridge real estate and finance, had plucked her from the system. He had not been looking for a daughter. He had been looking for a prop, a sad-eyed, grateful orphan to hold his hand during his Senate run, proving he was a man of compassion. He had lost the Senate race, but he had kept the girl. She was a sunk cost, an investment he expected returns on. Later that evening, the air in the Hale mansion was frigid, kept at a constant 68 degrees regardless of the season. Richard Hale sat at the head of the mahogany dining table, the sound of his silverware against the china echoing in the silence. He was a man carved from granite and ice, with silver hair and eyes that assessed everything, including his daughter, for weakness. "The gala tomorrow," Richard said without looking up from his steak. "I saw the guest list. You approved a table for the Moretti Foundation." Lena paused, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. She carefully lowered it. "Yes, they bought a platinum table. The donation cleared yesterday. It is $50,000 for the shelter initiative." Richard made a sound of disgust in the back of his throat. "It is blood money. Lena, Nico Moretti is a thug in a $3,000 suit. Having him there cheapens the brand. He runs a legitimate foundation," Lena countered, keeping her voice level. "And frankly, their money spends the same as the bank's. The shelter on the east side needs a new roof. Father, if we rely only on the clean money from your golf buddies, That roof will not be fixed until next winter." Richard stopped eating. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and looked at her. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You are becoming sentimental," he said. "It is an ugly look on you. You forget that the purpose of this foundation is to maintain the reputation of this family. We help people, yes, but we do it to maintain our standing. If we associate with criminals, we lose that standing. Then we can help no one." "It is not about reputation to the people freezing in the street," Lena said. The words slipped out before she could check them. A rare crack in her armor. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Do not lecture me on poverty. Lena, you have lived in a palace for 20 years. You've had the best schools, the best clothes, the best life money can buy. And why? Because I rescued you." Lena went still. There it was, the trump card. "I took you out of the gutter," Richard continued, his voice dangerously low. "I gave you a name. I gave you a future. Do not think for a second that you are sitting at this table because of your intellect or your charm. You are here because I was generous. You are a project that I am still waiting to see a return on. Do not make me regret my charity." The word charity hit her like a physical blow. Lena looked down at her plate, her appetite gone. The memory flashed behind her eyes. A little girl in oversized thrift store shoes, clutching a trash bag of clothes, looking up at the towering man who offered her a hand that felt cold and dry. She had thought he was a savior. She had not realized he was just a manager acquiring a new asset. "I understand," she whispered. "Ensure Moretti is seated in the back," Richard commanded, picking up his knife again. "And wear something appropriate tomorrow. The blue silk I bought you. You looked like a washboard in that gray thing you wore last week." The grand ballroom of the Hale Hotel was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. It was the night of the gala, and the air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and desperation. 300 of Graybridge's elite had gathered to pat themselves on the back for their generosity. Lena moved through the crowd with a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. She was exhausted. She'd been up since 4 a.m. coordinating the florists, the caterers, and the security teams. Her feet ached in her heels, but she moved with the smooth, gliding walk Richard had paid a deportment coach to teach her. She was not wearing the blue silk. It was a small rebellion, perhaps a foolish one, but she could not stomach the thought of wearing the dress Richard had chosen. It was cut too low, designed to show her off like a prize mare. Instead, she wore a dress she had bought herself with money saved from her stipend. It was a deep, emerald green velvet, high-necked and long-sleeved, fitted modestly to her frame. It was elegant, understated, and completely hers. She felt Richard's eyes on her from across the room. He stood near the stage, holding a whiskey, his gaze raking over her with distinct disapproval. She looked away, her heart hammering a nervous rhythm against her ribs. "Did you hear?" a woman whispered near the chocolate fountain. 2 waitresses were folding napkins, unaware Lena was standing behind the pillar. "Hear what? Nico Moretti is here. I saw him come in through the VIP entrance. My God, he's even taller in person. He scares me," the second waitress said, shivering. "My cousin says he runs the docks, says if you cross him, you do not just disappear, you get erased. My brother works construction on one of his sites." The first one argued. "He says Moretti pays double overtime and actually listens when the foreman talks about safety. He says Moretti is the only rich man in this city who remembers what it is like to be hungry." Lena moved away from the pillar, the gossip swirling in her head. Nico Moretti. The name had been a ghost in Graybridge for as long as she could remember. The Moretti crime family was a scar on the city's history. But Nico, the new head, was an enigma. Some called him a monster, others called him a necessary evil. She needed to check the bar stock. As she turned a sharp corner around a massive display of white lilies, a large man in a tuxedo stumbled backward, laughing loudly at a joke she didn't hear. He slammed into her shoulder with the force of a linebacker. Lena gasped as she was knocked off balance. Her clipboard went flying. She flailed, her heels skidding on the polished marble floor, and she braced herself for the humiliating impact of hitting the ground. It never came. A hand, large and warm and shockingly strong, clamped around her waist. It halted her fall instantly. Another hand steadied her hip, pulling her upright with an ease that suggested she weighed nothing at all. "Careful," a voice said. It was a deep baritone, smooth as aged bourbon and just as intoxicating. It vibrated through her chest. Lena blinked. Finding her footing, she looked up and up and up. The man holding her was devastating. That was the only word for him. He had hair the color of espresso, swept back from a face defined by sharp, aggressive angles, a strong jaw, high cheekbones, and a nose that had perhaps been broken once, long ago. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from her lungs. They were dark, intelligent, and framed by thick lashes, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She realized with a start that his hand was still on her waist. The heat of his palm burned through the velvet of her dress. I am so sorry," Lena stammered, pulling back slightly. Her heart was racing, not just from the near fall, but from the sheer proximity of him. The man did not let go immediately. He made sure she was steady before his hands fell away. Slowly, as if reluctant to break the contact. "The clumsiness was not yours," he said. His gaze flicked to the man who had bumped her, who was now drunkenly apologizing. The stranger in the tuxedo dismissed the drunk with a single, cold look that sent the man scrambling away into the crowd. Then, the stranger looked back at Lena, and the coldness vanished, replaced by a look of amusement. "But I believe you are wearing half of my Merlot." Lena looked down in horror. A dark, jagged stain was spreading across the front of the stranger's crisp white dress shirt. In the collision, his glass must have spilled. "Oh no," Lena breathed, her hands fluttering uselessly. "I'm so sorry. I can get some club soda. Please, let me pay for the cleaning." The man chuckled. A low, rumbling sound. He reached out, his fingers brushing the inside of her wrist as he gently lowered her hands. The touch was electric, sending a jolt straight up her arm. "It is just a shirt." "Signorina," he said, "I have plenty of them. Are you hurt?" "No," Lena said, her voice breathless. She felt a flush rising on her cheeks, and she knew it had nothing to do with the embarrassment. It was the way he was looking at her, not like a prop, not like a charity case, but like a woman. He was looking at her as if she were the only interesting thing in a room full of diamonds. "I am Lena," she said, the words slipping out automatically. "Lena Hale." The man's smile shifted. It became smaller, sharper, perhaps a little dangerous. "I know who you are," he said softly. "I am Nico. Nico Moretti." The air between them seemed to thicken. This was him? The monster? The savior? The man the waitresses were whispering about. He did not look like a thug. He looked like a king in exile, wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. "You are the donor," Lena managed to say. "And you are the organizer," Nico replied. He took a step closer, invading her personal space in a way that should have been threatening but felt strangely like shelter. "You look uncomfortable, Lena Hale. You look like you would rather be anywhere else but here." Lena opened her mouth to defend herself, to recite the polite, rehearsed lines about how much she loved the foundation, but the lie died on her tongue. His dark eyes seemed to see right through the velvet dress and the carefully pinned hair to the lonely, tired girl underneath. "I do not like crowds," she admitted quietly. Nico tilted his head. "Then why do you run them?" "Because it is what I am supposed to do," she said. Nico hummed, a thoughtful sound. "Doing what you are supposed to do is a good way to wake up one day and realize you have lived someone else's life." Before Lena could respond, a shadow fell over them. "Lena." The voice was sharp, cutting through the moment like a serrated knife. Lena stiffened. She turned to see Richard Hale standing there, his face a mask of tightly controlled fury. "Father," she said, instinctively stepping back from Nico. Richard ignored her. He was staring at Nico with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Moretti, I was under the impression that the purchase of a table included a seat. not permission to harass my staff. Nico turned slowly to face Richard. He was taller than Richard, broader, and infinitely more composed. He did not look intimidated. He looked bored. We were just discussing the hazards of overcrowding. Mr. Hale, Nico said coolly, your daughter was nearly knocked over by one of your more enthusiastic guests. Richard sneered. He looked at Lena, his eyes flicking to the emerald dress with disdain. I see you decided to ignore my advice on your attire. You look drab. And look at this mess. Spilling wine on guests? Go find the janitorial staff. You are making a scene. It was not her fault, Nico said. His voice had dropped an octave. It was no longer smooth. It was hard, like steel wrapped in silk. Stay out of this. Moretti, Richard snapped. He turned back to Lena, his face reddening. And while you are at it, I saw you speaking to that woman from the housing projects earlier. The one with the crying child. I told you. Lena, we do not let people like that into the VIP area. It looks bad. She is a recipient of the grant. Father, Lena said, her voice shaking but audible. She just wanted to say thank you. She walked here in the rain. I do not care if she crawled here, Richard hissed, his voice raising enough that heads nearby began to turn. The music seemed to fade as the guests sensed the tension. I am tired of you dragging strays into my house. I'm tired of you acting like this foundation is a soup kitchen. He took a step toward her, his finger jabbing the air. You are soft, Lena. I have spent 20 years trying to mold you into someone worthy of the Hale name, and you still act like the scared little nobody I picked up from the state. I am sick of carrying charity cases, including you. The silence that followed was absolute. The buzz of conversation in the ballroom died instantly. 300 people stared. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. The humiliation was absolute, a cold, suffocating wave that threatened to drown her. She stood frozen, stripped bare in front of the entire city. Her father had not just insulted her, he had disowned her humanity. Then, movement. Nico Moretti stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not posture. He simply moved into the space between Lena and her father, turning his back on Richard to face her. He reached out and placed his hand gently, possessively, at the small of her back. The heat of his touch anchored her to the floor when she felt like she might float away. He looked down at her, and for a second, his eyes were incredibly soft. Then he turned his head to look at Richard over his shoulder. The smirk on Nico's face was terrifying. It was the smile of a wolf that had just cornered a rabbit. You are done with charity. Richard? Nico asked. His voice carried clearly across the silent room. I am done wasting my fortune on ungrateful dependents, Richard spat, though he looked suddenly smaller in the face of Nico's calm. Nico nodded slowly. He turned back to Lena, his hand sliding slightly around her waist, pulling her an inch closer. It was a claim. It was a challenge. Good, Nico said. He looked at Lena, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a promise that made her knees weak. If he is done with charity, Nico said, his voice deep and resonating with absolute power, then I will be her only fortune. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Lena stood paralyzed, caught between the crushing weight of her father's rejection and the terrifying, exhilarating heat of the man who had just claimed her in front of the world. Nico Moretti wasn't just offering her protection, he was declaring war. And as she looked up into his unyielding gaze, Lena realized with a jolt that for the first time in her life, she wasn't just a case to be managed, she was something to be won. The morning sun that filtered into the Hale dining room was sharp and unforgiving, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the silent air. It felt less like a new day and more like an interrogation. Lena sat at the long mahogany table, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Richard Hale sat opposite her, buttering a piece of toast with the same surgical precision he used to dismantle companies. You are leaving, Richard said. It was not a question. Lena looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from a night spent staring at the ceiling. Father, please. The gala was a mistake. I was emotional. I can issue a public apology to the guests. I can fix this. Richard placed his knife down with a sharp clatter. He looked at her with an expression that was devoid of anger, which was infinitely worse. He looked at her with boredom. "You still do not understand, do you?" he asked, wiping his mouth. "This is not about a spilled glass of wine or a few rude words. This is about investment and return. For 20 years, I have poured resources into you. Education, wardrobe, etiquette training. I manufactured a backstory that pulled well with suburban voters. The orphan saved by the billionaire. It was a good narrative." He took a sip of his coffee. "But narratives get stale. Lena, and assets depreciate. Last night, you proved that you are no longer an asset. You are a liability. You embarrassed me in front of the Costa family, the mayor, and the entire board. You sided with a criminal over your own blood." "I am not your blood," Lena whispered, the realization settling in her chest like lead. "You never let me forget that." Richard stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "No, you are not. And as of this morning, you are no longer on my payroll. Your access to the company accounts has been terminated. Your position at the foundation has been dissolved. I want you out of this house in 1 week." 1 week? Lena stood up, panic seizing her throat. "But I have nowhere to go. My savings are tied up in the trust you control. That trust is for family members," Richard said coldly, checking his watch. "You are a stranger I performed a kindness for. That kindness has run its course. Do not look at me with those wet eyes. Lena, it is pathetic. I can replace you with a better PR story by the end of the quarter. There are thousands of blonde, blue-eyed orphans who would kill for a chance to be a Hale. You were just the one who happened to be available at the time." He walked out of the room without looking back. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, sealing the silence. Lena stood alone in the cavernous room, the cruelty of his words echoing in her ears. She was not a daughter. She was an employee who had just been laid off. By noon, Lena was in her bedroom, surrounded by open suitcases. She was packing only what she had bought with her own stipend money: jeans, sweaters, the few books Richard had not approved of. It amounted to terrifyingly little. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She stared at it, fearing it was Richard calling to accelerate the timeline, but the number was unknown. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and answered, "Hello, Miss?" "Hale," a woman's voice said, crisp and professional. "This is Elena, executive assistant to Mr. Nico Moretti. Mr. Moretti would like to invite you to lunch today to discuss potential opportunities." Lena gripped the phone tighter. "I am not interested in being a charity case for Mr. Moretti," she said, her voice shaking. "Please tell him thank you." "But no, Mr. Moretti anticipated you might say that," the woman replied smoothly. "He asked me to convey that this is a business meeting regarding your employment. He's aware of your sudden change in circumstances. He's offering a job, not a handout. He suggests you meet him at Il Forno at 1 o'clock. Lena ended the call and sat on the edge of the bed. Her pride screamed at her to refuse. Accepting help from the man who had publicly shamed her father felt like a betrayal, even if Richard deserved it. But then she looked around the room that was no longer hers. She had $74 in her wallet. She had no job, no references that Richard wouldn't poison, and nowhere to sleep in 7 days. Survival, she realized, was a luxury she had to buy with her pride. Il Forno was an upscale Italian restaurant in the heart of the financial district, a place where deals were made over bottles of Barolo that cost more than a compact car. When Lena arrived, the maitre d' did not ask for her name. He simply bowed his head and led her through the crowded dining room to a secluded alcove in the back, shielded by heavy velvet curtains. Nico Moretti was already there. He stood as she approached, a gesture of old-world manners that Richard had always neglected. In the daylight, without the tuxedo. Nico was even more imposing. He wore a charcoal suit, the top button of his shirt undone, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin. "Lena," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Thank you for coming." Lena did not sit immediately. She stood gripping the back of the chair, her knuckles white. "Why am I here? Mr. Moretti? If this is a pity lunch because you saw my father eviscerate me, I am not hungry." Nico's eyes, dark and unreadable, tracked her face. He saw the puffiness around her eyes, the tension in her jaw. He did not look away. "Sit," he said gently. "Please." Lena sank into the chair, keeping her posture rigid. A waiter appeared instantly, pouring water and vanishing before she could even register his presence. "I heard about this morning," Nico said quietly. "News travels fast in this city, especially when Richard Hale starts canceling credit cards and freezing assets. He threw me out," Lena said. The admission tasted like ash, but she refused to lie. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "He gave me a week. I have nothing, no money, no home, no job. He told me I was a bad investment. She waited for him to offer her money. She waited for him to slide an envelope across the table. The way men in her father's circle handled problems. Instead..." Nico leaned back, studying her with a strange kind of respect. "He is a fool," he said simply. "He built a fortune on real estate, yet he does not recognize the value of the only real thing in his house." He took a sip of his wine. "I want you to come work for me." "Lena..." "Doing what?" Lena asked, suspicion narrowing her eyes. "Planning galas? Pretending to be nice to people you despise?" "No," Nico said. "I have enough people to pretend. The Moretti Foundation has money. Lena, too much of it. But we lack direction. My team knows numbers, logistics, and supply chains. They do not know people. They do not know how to build a program that actually keeps a teenager off the street or helps a mother find a job. You do." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "I saw you last night. I saw you defending that woman when your father wanted her thrown out. I need that fire. I need someone who cares about the impact, not the headline." Lena looked at him, searching for the trap. "You are the head of the Moretti crime family," she said bluntly. "Half the city says you are a monster. Why would you care about social programs?" Nico's expression did not change, but the air around him grew heavier. "Because I know what it is like to have nothing," he said, "and because monsters are the only ones who can truly protect the weak. Angels are too busy keeping their wings clean." He paused, his gaze softening. "I am not asking for your gratitude. Lena, I am asking for your brain. I am asking for your work." Lena took a deep breath. She needed this, but she would not be owned again. "I have conditions," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Name them." Nico replied, "I want a formal employment contract." She said, "Standard salary, benefits, outlined responsibilities. I will not be a paid mistress. I will not be a figurehead. And I will absolutely not be a display piece for you to trot out to annoy my father. If I do this, I do it because the work matters." Nico stared at her for a long beat. Then, a slow, genuine smile curved his lips. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less dangerous. "Done," he said. "And," Lena added, faltering slightly as his gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second, "I report to the board, not to your bedroom." Nico laughed softly, a dark, rich sound. He leaned in, just enough that she could smell the scent of him. Sandalwood, espresso, and rain. The proximity made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. "You have a very suspicious mind. Lena Hale," he murmured. "I like it. You report to me. Strictly professional. Unless you decide otherwise." He signaled the waiter. "We have a deal?" Lena looked at his extended hand. It was large, scarred, and steady. She took it. His grip was warm, engulfing hers completely. "We have a deal," she said. The offices of the Moretti Foundation were located in a refurbished warehouse in the Navy Yard. Lena expected a front for illegal operations, dim lighting, men with bulges under their jackets, hushed conversations. Instead, she walked into a space that was bright, modern, and buzzing with legitimate activity. There were architects looking at blueprints for a community center. There were social workers debating budget allocations. It was professional. It was normal. "Ah, the runaway princess," a voice called out. Lena turned to see a man approaching her. He had the same dark eyes as Nico, but his face was open, his grin easy. He wore a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing intricate tattoos on his forearms. "I am Marco," the man said, offering a hand. "Nico's cousin, I handle the operations, basically. I make sure the money gets where you say it needs to go." Lena shook his hand. "Lena Hale. I know. Marco said, his grin fading slightly. Listen, Lena, welcome aboard, Nico. He is intense, but he means what he says about this place. Just remember one thing. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. This is the legitimate side, but the name on the door is still Moretti. There are unspoken dangers that come with that name, enemies who do not care if you are just the charity director. Keep your eyes open. Lena felt a chill slide down her spine. I will, she promised. Later that afternoon, she was summoned to Nico's office. It was a glass-walled enclosure overlooking the main floor, soundproof and commanding. Nico was standing at a large drafting table, looking at a map of the city. Come here, he said without looking up. Look at this. Lena approached the desk. He was pointing to a neighborhood in the South District, a notorious dead zone for services. We have a warehouse here, Nico said. I want to convert it. A youth center on the ground floor, legal aid on the second, but the zoning is a nightmare. Lena leaned over the map, studying the layout. You can bypass the zoning if you file it as a mixed-use educational facility, she said, pointing to a specific block. My father used that loophole for the marina project. If you partner with the local trade school, the city has to fast-track the permits. She felt a warmth radiating against her back and realized with a start that Nico had moved behind her. He was standing incredibly close, looking over her shoulder at where she pointed. His chest was inches from her spine. When he spoke, his breath ghosted against the sensitive skin below her ear. Brilliant, he murmured. Lena froze. Her pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against her throat. She could feel the solid wall of his presence, the sheer masculinity of him wrapping around her without even touching her. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. And God help her, it was magnetic. She stepped sideways, putting distance between them. Clutching her file folder to her chest, I can draft the proposal, she said, her voice breathless. Nico turned to look at her. His eyes were dark, dilated. He did not apologize for the closeness. He simply nodded. Do it, he said. By the time Lena finished her initial review of the files, the sun had set. The office was mostly empty. She packed her bag, feeling a strange sense of accomplishment she had never felt at Hale Enterprises. There, she'd been moving money around. Here, she felt like she was moving mountains. She walked out of the heavy glass doors onto the street. The air was cool and damp. She turned toward the subway station, but stopped. Across the street, a black sedan was idling. Two men were sitting in the front seat, their faces obscured by the shadows, but their heads turned in unison as she exited the building. They were watching her. Lena's heart slammed against her ribs. She remembered Marco's warning, unspoken dangers. She took a step back toward the door, reaching for the handle, but it opened before she touched it. Nico stepped out. He did not look at her. He looked straight at the sedan. His expression was terrifyingly blank. He lifted his hand in a small, dismissive gesture. The sedan's engine revved, and it peeled away from the curb, disappearing into the traffic. My car, Nico said, his voice brooking no argument. I can take the subway, Lena insisted, though her knees were shaking. No, Nico said. He took her elbow. His grip was firm, not painful but absolute. You are not taking the subway. Not tonight. Not ever again while you work for me. He steered her toward a silver luxury car waiting at the curb. A driver opened the back door. Nico guided her inside and slid in beside her. The interior was leather and silence. Lena sat close to the door, but the space was intimate. Nico's thigh brushed hers as the car turned a corner. He did not pull away. Those men, Lena whispered. Who were they? Nobody, Nico said, staring out the window. Just a reminder that the world is not polite. He turned to her. You are under my protection now. Lena, whether you like it or not, that means you do not walk alone at night. That means I know where you are. It sounds like prison, Lena said, trying to find her courage. Nico looked at her, and his face softened into something tragic and fierce. No, Kara. It is the only way to stay alive in my world, and you are in my world now. The apartment she had found was a shoebox. It was a sublet from a college student, furnished with IKEA leftovers and smelling faintly of stale beer. but it was hers. Lena sat on the lumpy beige sofa, staring at the cracks in the plaster. It was a far cry from the silk wallpapered suite at the Hale mansion. Her phone rang. The screen displayed Father. She let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello? Richard. You are making a mistake." Richard's voice came through the line, cold and metallic. "I heard you went to him." "I heard you were working for the butcher. I am working for a foundation," Lena said, gripping the phone. "A foundation that actually helps people." "Do not be naive," Richard shouted, his composure cracking. "The Moretti name is poison. He will use you. Lena, he will chew you up and spit you out, and when he is done, you will be unhireable. No one in this town will touch you. You are ruining your life to spite me." "I am living my life," Lena shot back, anger finally breaking through her fear. "For the first time, I am choosing. I know things about him." Richard lowered his voice to a venomous hiss. "Things that could bury him. If you stay there, you will be buried with him. Quit. Tonight. Crawl back here and apologize, and maybe I will let you work in the mailroom." Lena closed her eyes. She thought of Nico's hand on her back. She thought of the way he listened to her. She thought of the $50,000 for the trees versus the warehouse for the kids. "You lost the right to control me the moment you cut me off," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Do not call me again." She hung up. The silence that followed was crushing. The adrenaline faded, leaving her shaking. She curled up on the small sofa, pulling her knees to her chest. She was alone, truly, completely alone. The weight of the danger, the rejection, and the uncertain future crashed down on her. Her phone buzzed with a text. She picked it up, expecting another threat from Richard. It was an unknown number, but she knew who it was. "You are not alone in this. Sleep. I've got you." Lena stared at the screen. The tears she had been holding back finally fell, hot and fast, but as she read the words again, a strange warmth spread through her chest. It was terrifying to rely on a man like Nico Moretti. But for the first time in 20 years, she believed someone actually meant it when they said they would keep her safe. November turned into December, bringing a biting chill to the streets of Graybridge that seeped through the thickest coats. For Lena Hale. The cold was different this year. In her previous life, the life of silk sheets and chauffeurs, winter was something observed from behind double-paned glass. Now, it was something she felt. She spent her days navigating the parts of the city her father's maps usually labeled as redevelopment zones. She visited soup kitchens where the steam of vegetable broth fogged the windows, and youth centers where the plaster was peeling, but the heating bill was paid in full by the Moretti Foundation. It was disorienting. Lena had grown up hearing that men like Nico Moretti were parasites, bleeding the city dry. Yet, as she audited the books and walked the floors of these shelters, she saw a different truth. The money was often dirty. She was not naive enough to think it came from bake sales, but it was cleaning up messes the city government ignored. Nico Moretti was a paradox. He was a criminal who ensured the local library stayed open late so kids had a place to do homework. He was a shadow that kept the lights on. She was beginning to understand the respect the people in these neighborhoods held for him. It wasn't just fear. It was a transactional loyalty. He protected them when the law would not. However, the boardroom of the Moretti Foundation was a different world entirely. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the air in the conference room was stifling. Nico sat at the head of the black granite table, looking like a dark king holding court. Around him sat the legitimate face of his empire, investors, developers, and city planners who were happy to take his money as long as they could pretend they didn't know where it came from. Lena sat to Nico's right, her laptop open, presenting the quarterly impact report. She felt steady, confident in her data. "The expansion into the East End is ahead of schedule," Lena said, her voice clear. "The vocational training program has enrolled 300 students. We are seeing a measurable drop in petty crime rates in the surrounding blocks because these teenagers finally have somewhere to go." She finished and looked around the table. Most of the board members nodded, impressed by the numbers. But one man, Arthur Vance, a real estate developer with a penchant for loud ties and louder opinions, leaned back in his chair with a sneer. "The numbers are fine," Vance said, waving a hand dismissively, "but we have an image problem. Nico, the gala was weeks ago, and people are still talking about the scene with Richard Hale." Nico remained perfectly still, his eyes dark and unreadable, fixed on Vance. "What is your point? Arthur?" "My point," Vance said, gesturing rudely toward Lena, "is that having Hale's cast-off daughter running the show makes us look weak. It looks like we are picking up Richard's scraps." The room went dead silent. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. The insult was precise and cruel, echoing the exact words her father had used. Scraps. Charity case. She stiffened, gripping the edge of the table, preparing to defend herself, to cite her degrees, her experience, her work over the last month. But she never got the chance. Nico stood up. It was a slow, deliberate movement, but it sucked all the oxygen out of the room. He placed his hands flat on the table and leaned toward Vance. The violence in his posture was leashed, but undeniable. "Get out," Nico said. His voice was not loud. It was a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated through the granite table. Vance blinked, his arrogance faltering. "Now, Nico, be reasonable. I'm just saying, from a branding perspective, she is a liability. She is a discarded charity case. That woman," Nico interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a whip, "has done more for this city in 4 weeks than you have done in 40 years. He walked around the table, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic. He stopped behind Lena's chair. He did not touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from him, a solid wall of defense at her back. "You see a charity case?" Nico said, scanning the room, daring anyone else to speak. "I see the only person in this room with the courage to stand for something other than profit. I see brilliance, and I see loyalty." He looked back at Vance, his eyes narrowing. "She is the most valuable person in this room. Arthur, you, on the other hand, are easily replaced. Get out. We will buy out your shares by the end of the day." Vance scrambled to gather his papers, his face pale, and fled the room without another word. The remaining board members stared at the polished table, terrified to breathe. Meeting adjourned, Nico said. 10 minutes later, Lena stormed into Nico's office. She did not knock. She slammed the heavy glass door behind her, the sound echoing through the large, modern space. Nico was standing by the window, pouring a drink. He didn't turn around. "You should have warned me," Lena said, her voice shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and humiliation. "You knew Vance was going to say something. I saw the way you looked at him before the meeting started." Nico turned, glass in hand. He took a sip of amber liquid, watching her over the rim. "I handled it." "I did not need you to handle it," Lena snapped, throwing her folder onto his desk. "I can fight my own battles. Nico, I have spent my entire life having men talk over me or about me. I do not need you to be another one. When you stand up and protect me like that, you are just confirming what he said, that I am weak, that I need you to save me." Nico set the glass down. The calm facade he had worn in the boardroom cracked, revealing a flash of the volatile temper beneath. "He insulted you," Nico said, stepping around the desk. "He questioned your worth." "You expect me to sit there and let him speak to you like that? To let him sound like your father? I expect you to treat me like a partner," Lena argued, stepping toward him, her anger making her reckless. "I am not a damsel. Nico, I am not some fragile thing you picked up off the floor at the gala. I am doing the work. I am earning my place. I know you are." Nico's voice rose, matching hers. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. "That is why I fired him, because you are worth 10 of him." He stopped inches from her, his chest heaving slightly. The air between them crackled with a tension that had been building for weeks, in the stolen glances across the office, in the late-night text messages, in the car rides where they sat just a little too close. "You think I see you as weak?" Nico asked, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "Lena, I have never met anyone stronger. You walked away from $1 billion inheritance because you refused to be owned. Do you have any idea what that does to me?" Lena looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. The anger was still there, but it was twisting into something else, something hot and heavy that made her knees feel like water. "Then stop confusing me," she whispered. "Stop acting like I belong to you." Nico moved then. He stepped forward, forcing her back until her hips bumped against the edge of his mahogany desk. He placed his hands on the desk on either side of her, trapping her within the cage of his arms. He didn't touch her, but he was everywhere. "But you do," he said, his dark eyes searching hers, intense and unguarded. "You belong here, with me." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She should push him away. She should tell him this was unprofessional, that it violated every rule she had set. But her hands didn't push. Instead, they reached out, clutching the front of his dress shirt, bunching the expensive fabric in her fists. "Nico," she breathed, a warning and a plea all at once. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Tell me to back off, and I will walk out that door and never cross this line again." Lena looked at him, the sharp angle of his jaw, the scar through his eyebrow, the raw hunger in his eyes. She thought of her empty apartment. She thought of the coldness of her father's house, and she realized she didn't want to be safe. She wanted this. She didn't speak. She just tightened her grip on his shirt and tilted her head up. Nico let out a low groan, a sound of surrendered control, and crashed his mouth down on hers. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was a collision. It was weeks of repressed frustration and unspoken desire igniting all at once. His lips were firm and demanding, moving against hers with a starving intensity. Lena gasped, her mouth opening to him, and he took the invitation instantly, deepening the kiss until the room spun around her. She felt his hand come up to cup her face, his palm rough and warm against her cheek, his thumb tracing her jawline with possessive reverence. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard body, lifting her slightly so she was pressed to him from chest to thigh. Lena melted, the fight drained out of her, replaced by a liquid heat that pooled low in her belly. She abandoned his shirt and slid her hands up, her fingers threading into the thick hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. He tasted of whiskey and danger. For a moment, there was nothing but the sensation of him, the scratch of his stubble against her skin, the heavy thud of his heart against her chest, the way he groaned into her mouth when she nipped at his lower lip. It was overwhelming. It was real. Then, reality rushed back in. Lena broke the kiss, gasping for air, pushing slightly against his chest. They stood there, foreheads resting against each other, breathing heavily in the quiet office. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Probably," Nico rasped, his eyes still closed, his hand stroking the back of her neck. "But I have not been able to think about anything else since you spilled that wine on me." The spell was broken an hour later, not by regret, but by the news. Lena was back at her desk, trying to focus on a spreadsheet while her lips still tingled, when her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it, and her blood ran cold. She clicked the link and turned up the volume on her computer monitor. A live press conference was taking place on the steps of City Hall. Richard Hale stood at the podium, looking every inch the benevolent patriarch. Beside him stood a man Lena recognized from the society pages, Lorenzo Costa. "Pleased to announce a new partnership," Richard was saying, his voice booming with false sincerity. "Hale Enterprises is joining forces with the Costa Security Group to launch the Safe Streets Initiative. Our goal is simple: to drive the scourge of organized crime out of Graybridge once and for all. We are putting the gangs on notice. Corruption ends today." Lena stared at the screen in horror. The Costa Group was a security firm in name only. Everyone knew they were the front for the Costa crime family, the Moretti's bitterest rivals. Her father wasn't fighting crime. He was hiring a hit squad. She ran back to Nico's office. He was already watching the screen, his face a mask of stone. "You see it?" Lena asked, panic rising in her voice. "He has partnered with Costa. He says it is anti-corruption, but it is a declaration of war," Nico finished calmly. He turned off the screen. "Nico," Lena said, walking toward him, "this is because of me. He's doing this to get to you, because I am here. I am the link." Nico looked at her, and his expression was grim. "No, Lena, you are not the reason. You are just the excuse. What do you mean?" Nico sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Your father and I have been circling each other for years. Hale Enterprises launders money. Lena, huge amounts of it." Lena froze. "No, that is impossible. He's obsessed with his reputation. He would never risk it. He risks it every day," Nico said. "He has been washing money for the cartels through his construction contracts for a decade. I have known. I stayed out of it because it did not touch my territory. But recently, he started squeezing my supply lines, trying to push me out so he could monopolize the ports. Partnering with Costa? That was always his plan. Using you as the reason. That is just him trying to look like a grieving father instead of a greedy power broker." Lena sank into a chair. Her entire world tilted. Her father wasn't just cruel, he was a criminal. And she had spent years signing his checks, unknowingly complicit. "I did not know," she whispered. "I know you didn't," Nico said softly. Suddenly, Marco burst into the office and his face pale. "Nico," he said breathlessly, "we have a problem. Code red at the East Side Center." Nico's head snapped up. "What happened?" "Drive-by," Marco said. "A dark SUV. They sprayed the front entrance." "Is anyone hurt?" Nico demanded, already moving toward his coat. Marco hesitated. "No fatalities, but a kid took some glass. A little girl. She's on her way to St. Jude S. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and old coffee." Lena sat on a plastic chair, holding the hand of a sobbing woman. It was Maria, the mother Lena had helped at the gala. Her 7-year-old daughter, Sophia, was in surgery to remove shards of glass from her shoulder. "I am so sorry," Lena whispered over and over, tears streaming down her own face. "I am so sorry." Maria squeezed her hand, too shock-ridden to blame anyone. She was just a good girl. Maria sobbed. She was just coloring. Why would they shoot at a place where children are coloring? Lena had no answer. She knew why. It was a message. A message from the Costa Group, signed by her father. The automatic doors slid open, and the atmosphere in the waiting room shifted. Nico walked in. He looked terrifying. He had discarded his suit jacket. His white shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. There was a fresh, dark bruise forming along his jawline, and his knuckles were split and bloody. He looked like he had just walked out of a brawl. He spotted Lena and walked straight to her. He didn't care about the nurses staring or the security guard who nervously put a hand on his holster before thinking better of it. Nico knelt in front of Maria. He took her other hand. "Is she okay?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "The doctors say she will be fine." Maria wept. Stitches, scars, but she is alive. Nico closed his eyes for a second, letting out a breath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card with a direct number. "Whatever you need," Nico said fiercely. "Medical bills, therapy, a new apartment in a safer neighborhood, it is done. You call this number." He stood up and turned to Lena. She stood, trembling, wiping her tears. He looked at her, seeing the guilt eating her alive. Without a word, he pulled her into him. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her tight against his side. She buried her face in his shirt, smelling the sweat and the metallic tang of blood on him. "This is my fault," she muffled against his chest. "No," Nico said, his voice hard enough to cut glass. "This is war, and I promise you, Lena, whoever did this, they will never touch these streets again." He refused to let her go back to her apartment. "It is not safe," Nico said as they walked to his car. "Costa knows where you live. If Richard is desperate enough to shoot up a community center, he is desperate enough to snatch you back." Lena didn't argue. She didn't have the fight left in her. Nico's penthouse was atop the highest building in the city, a fortress of steel and glass overlooking the skyline. Inside, it was dimly lit and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the hospital. Lena sat on the oversized leather sofa, wrapped in a cashmere blanket Nico had draped over her. She held a mug of tea he had made, her hands still shaking slightly. Nico sat beside her. He had washed the blood off his hands, but the bruise on his jaw was darkening to a purple, ugly shade. "Did you find them?" Lena asked softly. "The men who did it?" Nico looked at the floor. "We found the car." He didn't elaborate, and Lena didn't ask. She knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that justice had been served, and it hadn't involved the police. She looked at him, this dangerous, violent man who funded libraries and held sobbing mothers' hands. "My father is a monster," Lena said into the silence. "He's a businessman who lost his moral compass," Nico corrected gently. He looked at her. "But you are not him. Do not let his sins weigh on you." He reached out and brushed a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was incredibly tender, at odds with the violence of the night. "You stayed," Nico said softly. "At the hospital. You didn't run." "I couldn't run," Lena whispered. "I am part of this now." Nico's gaze dropped to her lips. The air in the room shifted, heavy with the same magnetic pull from the office, but deeper now, sadder, more desperate. "Come here," he murmured. Lena leaned in. This time, the kiss was slow. It wasn't a collision, it was a sanctuary. Nico kissed her as if he was trying to memorize the shape of her mouth, his lips moving over hers with a drugged slowness. Lena sighed, her body relaxing for the first time in 12 hours. She turned into him, her legs curling up onto the sofa, pressing herself against his warmth. She felt his arm go around her, holding her securely, his hand splaying across her back. It was blurring. The lines between boss and employee, between protector and protected, were dissolving. As his tongue swept into her mouth, tasting of tea and longing, Lena realized she was no longer just working for Nico Moretti. She was falling for him, and in a city preparing for war, that was the most dangerous thing she could do. The move to the penthouse was swift, executed with the military precision that defined Nico Moretti's life. One moment, Lena was standing in her cramped sublet, staring at a threat assessment report that Marco had grimly slid across her kitchen table. The next, she was standing in the foyer of a glass and steel fortress 40 stories above the city. The penthouse was breathtaking, a sprawling expanse of modern architecture that offered a 300-degree view of Graybridge, but it was also cold. The furniture was sleek Italian leather, the floors were polished concrete, and the art on the walls was abstract and impersonal. It felt less like a home and more like a high-altitude bunker designed for a man who expected to be attacked. "This is temporary," Nico said, closing the heavy steel door behind them. He punched a code into a security panel that beeped in a series of reassuring, rhythmic tones. "Until we trace the source of the threat. The chatter suggests the Costa Group has put a price on anyone close to me. That includes you." Lena stood in the center of the living room, clutching her small overnight bag. She felt small in the vast space. "Where do I sleep?" Nico gestured toward a long hallway. "The master suite is at the end. It is yours." Lena frowned. "And where will you sleep?" "There is a guest room near the study," Nico said, his voice flat. "Professional. I will take that." "But this is your home," Lena argued. "I can take the guest room. The master suite has panic buttons in the bathroom and the bedside table." Nico interrupted. "It has reinforced glass and a separate air filtration system. You take the master—" "Lena, that is not a request." He walked past her toward the kitchen, loosening his tie, effectively ending the conversation. Lena watched him go, feeling a strange tension hum in the air. It was not just fear of the Costa hitmen, it was the sudden, overwhelming reality of sharing a living space with him. In the office, there were desks and glass walls to separate them. Here, there was nothing but air. 3 nights later, a storm rolled in off the Atlantic. It was a violent, thrashing thing that battered the city with gale-force winds and turned the sky a bruised purple. The power in the penthouse flickered, the lights dimming and surging as the grid struggled against the weather. Lena was in the kitchen, attempting to chop peppers for a pasta sauce. She was a terrible cook. Her childhood had been fueled by instant meals, and her life at the Hale Mansion had been catered by professional staff. She held the knife like it was a foreign object, hacking at the red pepper with zero finesse. Nico walked in. Having shed his suit for a soft gray t-shirt and track pants, he stopped in the doorway, watching her for a moment, a small smirk playing on his lips. "You are going to lose a finger," he observed dryly, "and I do not have any more Band-Aids. I'm doing my best," Lena shot back, though she smiled. "I thought since you were providing the fortress, I should at least provide dinner." Nico walked over, gently taking the knife from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, warm and calloused, sending that familiar jolt of electricity up her arm. "Sit," he commanded gently. "I will finish the peppers. You watch the water boil. That seems like a safe level of responsibility for you." Lena laughed, a bright, genuine sound that seemed to surprise them both. She hopped up onto the marble island, watching as Nico expertly diced the vegetables. His movements were fluid and efficient, the muscles in his forearms flexing with each chop. It was domestic. It was normal. And for two people whose lives were currently defined by threats and betrayals, it felt like a hallucination. The storm raged outside, rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. But inside, the kitchen was warm and smelled of garlic and basil. They ate at the island, shoulders brushing, talking about everything and nothing, the Foundation's new budget, a movie Lena had seen years ago, the terrible coffee in the break room. As the meal wound down, the conversation drifted into deeper waters. Thunder rattled the window panes, a low, ominous growl that seemed to remind them of the world outside. Lena traced the rim of her wine glass. "Nico? Why do you do it?" she asked softly. "The Foundation, the shelters. You spend millions of dollars helping people who can never pay you back. My father. He only helped people if there was a camera crew present, but you do it quietly. Why?" Nico went still. He stared into his wine, the playful light in his eyes dimming. For a long time, the only sound was the rain drumming against the glass. "I had a sister," he said finally. His voice was low, rough with a pain that time hadn't fully healed. "Her name was Julia. She was sweet, too sweet for this city." Lena set her glass down, giving him her full attention. "We grew up in the flats," Nico continued, his gaze distant. "Our mother died when we were young. Our father was absent. When Julia got sick, it was just a fever at first, then it got into her chest. I took her to the emergency room 3 times. 3 times. They made us wait for 6 hours and then sent us home with aspirin." His hand tightened around the stem of his glass until Lena thought it might shatter. "The last time, she could barely breathe. I begged the doctor to admit her. He looked at her clothes. He looked at my address. He told me they didn't have beds for charity cases. He told me to take her to a clinic across town. She died in the taxi on the way there. Oh, Nico." Lena breathed, her heart breaking for the boy he had been. "She was 12. Nico said." He looked up at Lena, his eyes fierce and dry. "She died because she was a poor girl from the wrong neighborhood, and nobody cared. I swore that day that I would never again be helpless. I swore I would own this city so that no one would ever tell me they didn't have a bed for someone I loved. And I swore that I would build places where people like Julia could go and be treated like human beings." He looked down at his hands, as if ashamed of the vulnerability he had just exposed. "It is not noble. Lena, it is vengeance. I am just balancing the scales." "It is not just vengeance," Lena whispered. She reached out across the marble counter, covering his clenched fist with her hand. Her skin looked pale and delicate against his. "It is love. You are saving them because you loved her." Nico looked at their joined hands. He turned his hand over slowly, interlacing his fingers with hers. The contact was an anchor in the storm. "You are the first person who has ever said that," he murmured. "Everyone else just sees the money or the crime. You see, me. I see you," Lena said, her voice shaking slightly. The atmosphere in the kitchen shifted. The air grew heavy, charged with a sudden, undeniable gravity. Nico stood up, slowly. Never breaking eye contact, he pulled gently on her hand, and Lena slid off the stool, stepping into the space between his spread knees. He reached up, cupping her face in his large, warm hands. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones, tracing the line of her jaw. He looked at her as if she were something precious, something he was terrified of breaking. "Lena," he rasped, "if I kiss you now, I'm not going to stop." Lena's breath hitched. She looked at his mouth, then up into his dark, storm-gray eyes. She thought of the danger waiting outside. She thought of her father's coldness, and she thought of the warmth of this man, who built hospitals for a ghost. "Don't stop," she whispered. Nico let out a low, ragged breath. "Are you sure? Once we cross this line, there is no going back. I will not let you go. I do not want to go back," Lena said. "I am sure." He lowered his head and kissed her. It was soft at first, a question asked and answered in the silence of the room. His lips were warm and firm, moving against hers with a tenderness that made her knees weak. Lena sighed into his mouth, her hands coming up to rest on his chest through the soft cotton of his t-shirt. She could feel the steady, heavy thrum of his heart. It beat against her palms, a rhythm of life and strength. Nico groaned, a vibration she felt in her own chest, and the kiss deepened, his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The heat of his body was overwhelming, a furnace against the chill of the storm. Lena's fingers slid up his chest, curling into the fabric at his shoulders, holding on as the world narrowed down to just the two of them. He lifted her easily, setting her on the edge of the island, stepping between her legs to bring them even closer. His hands roamed over the curve of her hips, his touch reverent, exploring her as if she were a map he needed to memorize. There was no rush, only a desperate, aching need to be close. Nico. She breathed against his neck as his lips trailed down her jawline. "Let me take you to bed," he whispered against her skin. "Yes," she said. "Yes." He lifted her down, keeping her wrapped in his arms, and they moved toward the bedroom. It was a tangle of whispered names and unsteady breaths, a slow procession through the shadows of the penthouse, in the sanctuary of the bedroom. The storm outside was reduced to a distant murmur. The only light came from the city glow filtering through the rain-streaked windows. Nico undressed her with fumbling, tender motions, his hands trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from the sheer magnitude of his restraint. When he finally pulled her against him, skin against skin, Lena felt a sense of coming home that she had never experienced in her life. He was hard muscle and rough scars, but his touch was incredibly gentle. He traced the line of her spine, the curve of her waist, murmuring words in Italian that she didn't understand but felt in her marrow. They moved together on the cool sheets, finding a rhythm that was all their own. It wasn't about conquest or power. It was an unraveling. With every kiss, every touch, every soft laugh that turned into a shaky sigh, the walls they had both built around their hearts crumbled a little more. When they finally gave in to the desire that had been simmering between them for weeks, it was an act of absolute trust. Lena held on to him, feeling the strength of his body pressed fully against hers, and for the first time, she wasn't the billionaire's daughter or the charity case. She was just Lena, and she was loved. Morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, gray and diffused. Lena woke slowly, a heaviness in her limbs that felt delicious. She shifted and realized she was tangled in sheets that smelled of sandalwood and musk. Nico was asleep beside her. He lay on his back, one arm thrown over his eyes, the other locked protectively around her waist. Even in sleep, he was holding her. Lena watched the slow rise and fall of his chest, tracing the jagged scar on his shoulder with her eyes. A wave of emotion crashed over her. Joy, certainly, but followed closely by a cold, sharp terror. She had given him everything, her body, her trust, her heart. She had handed him the power to destroy her. If he left, if he died, she would be hollowed out. She carefully extricated herself from his grip, needing a moment to breathe. She grabbed his discarded shirt from the floor, pulling it on as she walked into the living room. Her phone, left on the coffee table the night before, was blinking with a notification. She picked it up, A voicemail from an unknown number. She brought the phone to her ear. Lena? It was her father's attorney, Mr. Sterling. His voice sounded strained. I did not know who else to call. Your father. He collapsed this morning. It looks like a massive cardiac event. He's at the St. Jude's private clinic. He's asking for you. Lena stood frozen. The phone felt like ice in her hand. A heart attack. Guilt, ancient and ingrained, flooded her chest. He was a monster, yes, but he was the man who had raised her. He was the only father she had known. She ran back to the bedroom. Nico was stirring. He sat up as she entered, the sheet falling to his waist, his hair tousled. He smiled when he saw her, a sleepy, boyish expression that vanished the moment he saw her face. What is it? He asked, instantly alert. It is Richard, Lena said, scrambling to find her clothes. He had a heart attack. He's in the hospital. Nico was out of bed in a second, crossing the room to grab her arms gently. Lena, stop. Think, this is convenient timing, is it not? We go into hiding, and 2 days later he is dying? It is Mr. Sterling, Lena said, pulling away to pull on her jeans. He wouldn't lie. He's a lawyer, not a gangster. Richard pays him to lie, Nico argued, his voice rising. It is a trap. Lena, he is trying to draw you out. I cannot take that risk, Lena shouted, spinning to face him. What if it is real? What if he dies? And I didn't go. I hate him, Nico, but I owe him my life. I have to go. Nico stared at her, seeing the frantic desperation in her eyes. He knew that look. It was the look of someone bound by a debt they could never repay. I am coming with you, he said, reaching for his pants. No, Lena said firmly. If you come, it will be a scene. He will get upset, and it could kill him. I will go alone. I will take the car. I will take the driver. I will be in a hospital surrounded by doctors. It is safe. Lena, please, Nico, I have to do this for me. To know that I did the right thing. Nico clenched his jaw, the muscles working. He hated it. Every instinct in his body screamed that this was wrong, but he saw the resolve in her face, and he knew that if he forbade her, he would be just another man trying to control her. Take the armored car, he said curtly, and take Marco. He waits outside the door. The St. Jude's private clinic was a place of hushed whispers and marble floors. Lena hurried down the corridor, her heart pounding. Marco trailed a few steps behind her, his hand hovering near his jacket pocket, his eyes scanning every corner. She burst into room 304. Richard was lying in the bed, hooked up to a monitor that beeped in a steady, slow rhythm. He looked small. The titan of industry was pale, his skin papery, his silver hair unkempt. Father, Lena whispered, approaching the bed. Richard's eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, and a weak smile touched his lips. You came, he rasped. Of course I came, Lena said, taking his cold hand. You are a good girl, Richard said, his voice thready. Better than I deserve. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. Lena, you have to listen to me. I made mistakes. I was hard on you, but I was trying to protect you. Protect me, Lena asked, confusion clouding her worry. From him, Richard said, his grip on her hand tightening surprisingly. Moretti, he's using you. Lena, he does not love you. You are leverage. He's holding you to keep me from moving against his territories. That is not true, Lena said, pulling her hand back. It is true, Richard insisted, his voice gaining a sudden, frantic strength. He's a criminal, a murderer. Once he gets what he wants from me, he will discard you. He will throw you away just like everyone else has. You have to come back to me before it is too late. I cannot come back, Lena said softly. I am building a life, Father, a real life. Richard's face changed. The frailty evaporated, replaced by a sneer that was all too familiar. A life, he spat, sitting up straighter. The monitor's beeping didn't change rhythm. It was steady, too steady. You are playing house with a thug. You are embarrassing me. Lena stared at the monitor, then at him. You are not dying, she said, her voice hollow. I am dying of shame. Richard shouted, Look at you, dressed like a commoner, smelling like him. I took you in. I gave you a name. And this is how you repay me. You run to my enemy? I fell in love, Lena said, tears pricking her eyes. Love? Richard laughed, a cruel, barking sound. You think a man like that can love you? You are a broken little charity case. Lena, that is all you have ever been. That is all you will ever be. He just wants to own you because my name is on your birth certificate. The words hit her like physical blows, but this time, they didn't shatter her. They hardened her. She looked at the man in the bed, the man who had bought her, used her, and now lied to her. I am not a charity case, she said, her voice steady and cold. And I am not your daughter. Goodbye, Richard. She turned on her heel and walked out. She ignored his shouts behind her. She walked past Marco, her face set in stone. Let's go, she said. Now. They took the elevator down to the parking structure. It was quiet, the concrete echoing with their footsteps. I knew it was a lie, Lena muttered, wiping her eyes furiously. Nico was right. We need to get you back to the penthouse, Marco said, his voice tight. He touched his earpiece. Something is wrong. The signal is jammed. Suddenly, a van screeched around the corner, tires smoking. Marco shoved Lena behind a concrete pillar. Get down! The side door of the van slid open, and 4 men in tactical gear spilled out. They weren't common street thugs. They moved with military coordination. Marco drew his weapon, firing 2 shots that sparked against the van's armor, but he was outflanked instantly. A suppressor-equipped rifle coughed twice, and Marco crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg. No! Lena screamed, breaking from cover to reach him. Strong hands grabbed her from behind. She fought, scratching and kicking, landing a solid blow to a masked face, but a cloth soaked in chemical acridity was shoved over her nose and mouth. She held her breath, thrashing, but the world began to swim. The last thing she saw was the logo on the van, a generic cleaning company, but beneath the grime, she recognized the faint outline of the Costa family crest. Richard had given the order. In the penthouse, Nico was pacing. He had called Lena 3 times, straight to voicemail. He had called Marco. Nothing. He stopped pacing. A cold, metallic taste filled his mouth. It was a sensation he hadn't felt in years. Panic. His computer chimed, a priority alert from the tracking software embedded in Lena's phone. Signal lost. Last known location, St. Jude S. Clinic, parking garage. Then, a new window popped up. It was a feed from the garage security cameras, hacked by his team. Nico watched in silence. He saw the van. He saw Marco fall. He saw Lena fighting. Brave, foolish Lena, fighting like a lioness before being dragged into the darkness of the van. The video ended. Nico stood perfectly still for 5 seconds. The silence in the penthouse was deafening. Then, he slammed his fist onto the mahogany desk. The wood cracked with a sickening snap, splinters flying. He didn't feel the pain. He felt only a white-hot rage that threatened to burn the city to the ground. He hit the intercom button. "Get everyone," he said, his voice a low, demonic growl. "Every soldier, every captain, every debt we are owed." There was a pause on the other end. "Boss, what are the orders?" Nico looked out the window at the city that had taken his sister, and now had taken the only woman who had ever made him feel alive. "War," Nico said. "We are going to war." The world came back in fragments. First, the smell, a thick, cloying mixture of diesel fuel, damp rot, and the metallic tang of old rust. Then, the sound of distant seagulls crying out against a gray sky. Finally, the pain. A throbbing ache pulsed behind Lena's eyes, the lingering ghost of the chemical cloth that had smothered her consciousness. Lena blinked, her vision swimming into focus. She was sitting on a wooden crate in what looked like a cavernous, abandoned warehouse. The ceiling was high and shadowed, crisscrossed with rusted beams. Light filtered in through grime-encrusted windows high above, casting long, prison bar shadows across the concrete floor. She tried to move her hands and found them bound tight. Thick plastic zip ties bit into the tender skin of her wrists, securing her hands behind her back. Panic flared, hot and sharp, but she forced it down. She had to think. She had to survive. She scanned the room. 3 men stood near a heavy steel door about 30 feet away. 2 of them were strangers, wearing heavy jackets and carrying sidearms openly. Costa enforcers. But the 3rd man made her blood run cold. He wore a gray tactical uniform with a familiar logo on the shoulder patch. It was Grant, her father's head of personal security, the man who used to drive her to piano lessons when she was 12. He was standing shoulder to shoulder with the men who had shot Marco. The betrayal was total. It was not just a business move. It was a complete erasure of her safety. Richard had not just hired criminals. He had integrated his own people with them. The heavy steel door creaked open with a groan of rusted hinges. Richard Hale walked in. The sight of him was jarring. He was dressed in an immaculate navy suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, looking as if he were stepping into a board meeting rather than a hostage situation. He stopped a few feet from her, checking his watch. "You are awake," Richard said. His tone was mild, conversational. "Good. The timing is tight." Lena stared at him. She expected to feel rage or terror or sorrow. Instead, she felt a strange, icy clarity. The man standing before her was a stranger. "You handed me over to them," Lena said, her voice raspy from the drugs. "You let them shoot Marco. You let them drug me." "It was a necessary extraction," Richard replied, dusting an invisible speck of lint from his lapel. "If you had simply listened to me at the hospital, none of this would have been required. But you have always been stubborn. Lena." He gestured around the grim warehouse. "This is not the accommodation I would have chosen for you. But Lorenzo Costa insisted on neutral ground. You are safe here, as long as you remain cooperative." "Safe?" Lena laughed, a dry, broken sound. "I am tied up in a warehouse. Richard, I am a hostage." "You are leverage," Richard corrected her. "There is a difference." He began to pace, his shoes clicking rhythmically on the concrete. "Nico Moretti has become a problem. He's squeezing my supply lines. He's threatening my partners. And now, he has you. He thinks he can use you to legitimize himself, to wash his reputation clean with the Hale name. I am simply taking back my asset to negotiate a better deal." "Is that all I am?" Lena asked quietly. "An asset?" Richard stopped pacing. He looked at her, and for a moment Lena saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret? No, it was annoyance. "Do not be dramatic," he said. "I gave you a life most people dream of. Private schools, vacations in the Alps, an inheritance that would have set you up for life if you hadn't thrown it away." "Why did you adopt me?" Lena asked. The question had haunted her for 20 years, but she had never dared to ask it until now. "You never wanted children. You hate mess. You hate noise. Why did you take a 6-year-old girl from the foster system?" Richard sighed, looking at the ceiling as if praying for patience. "It was 1998, he said. "We were preparing for the initial public offering of Hale Enterprises. The market was volatile. My polling numbers were down. The board was concerned that I appeared too cold, too corporate. They suggested I needed a humanizing element, something to soften the image." Lena felt the air leave her lungs. She sat perfectly still, the zip ties digging into her wrists. "My advisors found you," Richard continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your backstory tested well with focus groups. Tragically orphaned, bright, quiet. It was the perfect narrative. The billionaire saving the lost child. Our stock price jumped 15% the day the adoption was finalized." He looked back at her, his face blank. "It was a business decision, Lena, and it was a good one. For both of us. You got a fortune and I got my IPO. It was a mutually beneficial transaction, a transaction the final piece of Lena's heart. The small part that had still hoped for some misunderstanding. Shattered. He had never loved her. Not even a little. She was a prop. She was a graph on a quarterly report. She was an investment that had finally matured. And now he was cashing her out. The pain was so sharp it was almost physical. But then it vanished. In its place, a cold, hard resolve settled in her chest. "I see," Lena said. Her voice did not shake. She lifted her chin, looking him dead in the eye. "Thank you for finally telling the truth. It makes this much easier." "Makes what easier?" Richard asked, frowning. "Hating you," she said. Across the city, the air in Nico Moretti's war room was thick with smoke and violence. The room was buried deep in the basement of a nightclub, soundproofed and secure. Maps of the city were spread across the central table, weighted down by guns and bottles of whiskey. Nico stood at the head of the table. He had not slept. He had not changed his clothes. The sleeves of his dress shirt were rolled up, revealing the tension in his forearms as he leaned over the map. His eyes were burning coals. We hit the Costa stronghold in the south. One of his captains, a scarred man named Dante, growled. We burn it down. We take Lorenzo's wife. We make them trade. No, another captain argued. That starts a street war. Civilians die. The police come down on us. We have to negotiate. Give them the ports. We can take them back later. Nico slammed his hand onto the table. Silence fell instantly. We are not touching civilians, Nico said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. And we are not giving up the ports. If we give Costa the ports, he controls the city's supply chain. He will starve out the neighborhoods we protect. I will not trade the livelihood of 5,000 families for one life. Even for her? Dante asked softly. Nico looked at him. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. I will not destroy this family to save her, Nico said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. But I will burn myself to the ground if I have to. His phone rang. The room froze. It was a burner phone, the number known only to 3 people. Nico picked it up. Speak. Hello. Nico. Richard Hale's voice was smooth, smug. I trust you are ready to be reasonable. Where is she? Nico demanded. Safe. For now? Richard paused. Here are the terms. You will come to the warehouse at the old shipyard, Dock 4. You will come alone. You will come unarmed. You will bring the deeds to the waterfront properties and a signed confession taking sole responsibility for the racketeering charges currently pending against my construction firms. You want me to go to prison for your crimes, Nico said flatly. I want you out of the way, Richard said. Prison, death. I am indifferent, as long as you are gone. And Lena? She goes free the moment the ink is dry. Nico's hand tightened around the phone until the plastic creaked. He looked at the faces of his men, loyal, ready to die for him. He looked at the map of the city he had sworn to protect. I accept, Nico said. Excellent. Midnight. Do not be late. And Nico, if I see one of your men, if I smell a setup. She dies. The line went dead. Nico lowered the phone. He looked at Dante. Prepare the car, he said. I am going alone. Boss, you cannot, Dante protested. It is a suicide mission. I know, Nico said. He turned to the corner of the room where Marco sat in a wheelchair, his leg heavily bandaged but his laptop open. Marco, Nico said quietly, is the package ready? Marco looked up. His face was pale, but his eyes were sharp. The files are decrypted. The evidence of Richard's money laundering, the bribes to the mayor, the Costa payoffs. It is all here. It is a nuclear bomb. Nico, if we release this, Richard goes down for life, but so do you. The files implicate you in the early deals. Nico nodded. He began to check his weapon, a reflex before he remembered he had to go unarmed. If I walk into that warehouse, I am not walking out, Nico said. Richard will kill me the moment I sign those papers. Then why go? Marco asked. To buy time, Nico said. I go in the front door. I keep them focused on me. You have the files. If I give the signal, or if my heart stops beating, you release them to the FBI, the press, everyone. It will destroy everything you built, Marco whispered. No, Nico said, putting on his jacket. It will destroy the corruption, and it will save her. That is enough. Back in the warehouse, the hours dragged by like centuries. The light in the windows faded to a bruised purple, then to black. The temperature dropped, and Lena shivered in her thin sweater. Richard returned with a tablet in his hand. He wants to see you. Richard said, stand up. Grant, the security guard, hauled Lena to her feet. Richard positioned himself behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. To anyone watching, it might look like a father comforting his daughter. Lena felt his touch like a brand. Richard tapped the screen. A video call connected. Nico's face appeared. He was in his car, the interior dark. He looked exhausted. Shadows circled his eyes, and the stubble on his jaw was dark. But when he saw her, His eyes softened with such intensity that Lena felt a sob catch in her throat. "Lena," he said. His voice was tinny through the speakers, but it was him. "Are you hurt?" "I am fine," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Nico, do not come. It is a trap. He's not going to let us go." Richard squeezed her shoulder. Hard. "That is enough." He looked into the camera. "You see, she is alive. She is well. Bring the papers." "Nico, I am 10 minutes away," Nico said. His gaze was locked on Lena. "I am coming." "Lena, hold on. He is going to kill you," Lena screamed, lunging toward the screen. Richard ended the call abruptly. He shoved the tablet into his pocket and turned to the Costa enforcers. "Is everything ready?" The lead thug, a man with yellow teeth and dead eyes, nodded. "As soon as he signs. We put a bullet in him. And the girl?" Richard looked at Lena. He adjusted his cufflinks. "Dispose of her," he said. "She knows too much, and frankly, she has become a liability." He turned and walked away toward the office area of the warehouse to wait. Lena stood frozen. She had heard it. The confirmation, she was dead either way. Nico was walking into a slaughter, and she was scheduled for execution. The guard, Grant, pushed her back down onto the crate. "Sit down. Don't make trouble." He walked a few paces away to light a cigarette, leaving her with a younger guard, a kid who looked barely 20, nervous and shifting his weight from foot to foot. Lena looked at the kid. She saw the sweat on his upper lip. He was Costa muscle, but he wasn't hardened like the others. "My hands," she whispered. The kid looked down at her. "What?" "The zip ties," she said, letting a tremor enter her voice. "They are cutting off my circulation. My fingers are purple. Please. If I pass out from the pain, Richard will be angry with you." The kid glanced at her hands. They were indeed turning a mottled red. He looked over at Grant, who was busy smoking and checking his phone. "Please," Lena begged softly. "Just loosen them a little. I am not going anywhere. Look at me." The kid hesitated, then pulled a knife from his belt. He knelt behind her. "Don't try anything," he muttered. He sawed slightly at the plastic. He didn't cut it off, but the pressure released. The tie was still there, but it was loose. "Thank you," Lena breathed. She tested her wrists. She had maybe half an inch of play. It wasn't enough to slip out yet, but it was a start. She began to twist her hands, ignoring the pain of the plastic scraping her skin, working to stretch the binding further. She looked around the warehouse with new eyes. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a woman who had run a foundation, managed millions of dollars, and survived Richard Hale for 20 years. She began to calculate. The door Richard had exited through. The pile of rusty pipes near her feet, the nervous kid who was clearly terrified of the older men. She would not wait for Nico to save her. She would not wait to be traded like a used car. If they wanted to dispose of her, she was going to make it the hardest thing they ever tried to do. In the silence of the safe house, Nico sat for a moment before leaving the car. He pulled out his phone. He opened the voice recorder app. He stared at the red button for a long second, then pressed it. "Lena," he began. His voice was steady, low. "If you are hearing this, it means I didn't make it out. It means Richard won the battle. But I promise you, he will not win the war. Marco has instructions to release everything. Your father will never hurt you again." He paused, looking out at the rain-slicked pavement of the warehouse district. "I need you to know something. Richard called you a charity case. He called you an asset. He was wrong. You were the only real thing in his life, and he was too blind to see it. And me. I was just a man walking in the dark until you spilled that wine on me." He swallowed hard. "I love you, Lena, not because you are a Hale. Not because you are beautiful, but because you saw the man behind the monster. And you didn't run away. You are my equal. You are my partner. You are the only fortune I ever needed." He took a breath. "Do not mourn me. Live. Build the foundation. Save the city. And never, ever let anyone tell you that you do not belong. You belong to yourself." He stopped the recording. He saved the file and sent it to a secure server, set to email to her account in 24 hours if he didn't enter a cancel code. Nico put the phone in his pocket. He opened the car door and stepped out into the night. He raised his empty hands, showing them to the hidden snipers he knew were watching from the roof. He walked toward the warehouse doors, his head high, walking to his death to save the woman who had saved him. The air inside the warehouse was heavy, stagnant with the smell of wet concrete and the metallic tang of impending violence. Outside, the night was silent, but it was a deceptive silence. Inside, the central bay was a theater of cruelty illuminated by portable floodlights that cast harsh, jagged shadows against the corrugated steel walls. Lena stood in the center of the room. Her wrists were still bound behind her back, but the plastic zip tie was loose against her skin, a secret she held onto with white-knuckled desperation. She kept her chin raised, refusing to look at the floor. She looked at the men who thought they owned her. To her left stood Lorenzo Costa, a man whose reputation for brutality was etched into the lines of his scarred face. Beside him, looking jarringly out of place in his Italian wool suit, was Richard Hale, her father. He checked his watch with a look of impatient annoyance, as if this were a board meeting that was running 5 minutes over schedule. "He's late," Richard muttered, smoothing his tie. "He will come," Lorenzo said, his voice like gravel grinding in a mixer. "He's a fool for the girl. Men like him always die for sentiment." Richard looked at Lena, his expression cold and appraising. It was the look he gave a property he was about to liquidate. "You should be grateful. Lena, I am cleaning up the mess you made. When this is over, you will go to Europe. A quiet year in Zurich." "I am not going anywhere with you," Lena said. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. Richard stepped closer, his hand raising as if to strike her, but he lowered it. "You have no leverage here. You are a bargaining chip. Try to remember your value." Suddenly, the heavy metal groan of the main cargo door echoed through the cavernous space. Every head turned. The Costa guards raised their automatic rifles, 20 weapons clicking off safety in unison. The small pedestrian door cut into the larger bay entrance opened. Nico Moretti walked in. He was alone. He wore a black suit, the coat unbuttoned and flared open to show the white dress shirt underneath. He held his hands out to his sides, palms open, demonstrating clearly that he was unarmed. The silence that descended was suffocating. Nico walked down the center aisle created by the armed men. He did not look at the guns pointed at his chest. He did not look at Lorenzo or Richard. His gaze was locked entirely on Lena. His eyes were dark, burning with a terrifying mixture of exhaustion and ferocity. In them, Lena saw a promise. "I am here. I have you." He stopped 10 feet from the group. "The papers," Richard said, breaking the silence. His voice was too loud, betraying his nerves. Nico reached into his inner jacket pocket slowly. The guards tensed. He pulled out a thick envelope and tossed it onto the wooden crate that served as a makeshift table between them. "The deeds to the waterfront properties," Nico said. His voice was calm, flat, and carried to the rafters. "And the signed confession. It states that I forced Richard Hale into money laundering operations. It absolves him of all legal liability." Richard snatched the envelope up. He tore it open, scanning the documents with feverish intensity. He laughed, a short, sharp sound of triumph. "Perfect," Richard breathed. He looked at Lorenzo. "It is all here. He is finished." Lorenzo stepped forward, a cruel smile stretching his lips. He looked at Nico. "You are a smart man, Moretti, but you are soft. Secure him," Lorenzo ordered his men. 2 guards moved toward Nico with zip ties. Nico did not resist. He stood still, but his eyes flicked to the perimeter, scanning the shadows, calculating the angles. He looked at Lena again, a micro movement of his head signaling something. "Wait," but Lena was done waiting. She saw the guard approaching Nico. She saw the way Lorenzo's hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip. They were not going to let him live. The moment those cuffs went on, Nico was a dead man. She looked at the guard closest to her, the nervous young kid who had loosened her ties. He was watching Nico, distracted by the legendary crime boss standing in front of him. His rifle was lowered slightly. Lena took a breath. She thought of the fear that had ruled her life for 20 years. She thought of Richard's cold control, and then she let it all go. Now. Lena wrenched her hands apart. The loosened zip tie snapped with a sharp crack. She didn't hesitate. She lunged sideways, not away from the danger, but directly into it. She slammed her shoulder into the young guard, knocking him off balance. He shouted, his finger spasming on the trigger. Bang. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet went wild, sparking against the steel rafters, but it was enough. The tension in the room snapped like a cable. "Get down!" Lena screamed, her voice tearing through her throat. Chaos erupted. Nico moved faster than thought. The moment the shot rang out, he didn't dive for cover away from her. He sprinted toward her. As the Costa guards turned their weapons in confusion, Nico reached Lena. He slammed into her, his momentum carrying them both behind a stack of heavy shipping crates. He spun her around, shoving her into the corner formed by the wood and the wall, and covered her body with his own. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Bullets chewed into the wood of the crates, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. The sound was a continuous, thunderous roar. Nico pressed her against the wall, his heavy frame shielding every inch of her. His arms were wrapped tight around her head and waist. Lena buried her face in his chest, her fingers digging into the fabric of his suit jacket, feeling the hard muscles of his back tense with every impact against the crate. "I told you to stay still!" Nico roared over the noise, his voice half furious, half terrified. Lena looked up at him, her face streaked with dust, her heart hammering against his. "I am done doing what men like you and him tell me." She yelled back, breathless and fierce. Nico looked down at her. For a split second, amidst the flying bullets and the shouting, a grin flashed across his face, wild, reckless, and full of pride. "Fair enough," he shouted. Suddenly, the warehouse doors were blown inward with a concussive blast that shook the floor. Blue and red lights flooded the cavernous space, cutting through the gloom. A voice amplified by a megaphone boomed over the gunfire. "Federal agents, drop your weapons! Nowhere to run!" Nico's plan had worked. The package Marco had decrypted, the years of evidence documenting Richard's bribery, the Costa murders, the corruption had been delivered to the FBI task force an hour ago. The warehouse turned into a war zone. Flashbangs detonated with blinding white light. Tactical teams in body armor swarmed through the breached doors. The Costa enforcers, realizing they were cornered, opened fire on the agents. "Stay down," Nico commanded, pressing Lena tighter into the corner as the firefight raged. Through the gaps in the crates, Lena saw the battle unfold. It was violent and swift. The federal agents were disciplined, moving in a wave. The Costa men were falling back. She saw Richard. He was scrambling away from the center of the room, clutching a briefcase that contained the incriminating documents he thought would save him. He was running toward a side exit, his face a mask of sheer panic. "Richard!" an agent shouted. "Freeze!" Richard stumbled. He looked back, saw the agents closing in, and saw the Costa men being handcuffed. He saw his empire crumbling in real time, desperate. He spotted Lena and Nico emerging from behind the crates as the firing died down. Richard scrambled toward them. He looked nothing like the tycoon who had sat at the head of the table. His suit was torn, his hair wild, his eyes manic. "Lena!" he gasped, lunging toward her. He grabbed at her arm with a trembling hand. "Lena, you have to tell them. You have to tell them I was coerced. Tell them Moretti forced me." Nico stepped forward to shove him back, but Lena put a hand on Nico's chest, stopping him. She stepped out from behind Nico's protection. She looked down at the man who had bought her like a stock option. "Tell them what? Richard?" Lena asked softly. The warehouse was quieting down as the agents secured the scene, leaving her voice to carry in the sudden stillness. "That I am your father," Richard pleaded, sweat dripping down his face. "That I saved you. You owe me. Lena, I gave you everything. You cannot let them take me. I am Richard Hale." Agents were moving in, handcuffs ready. Richard clung to Lena's sleeve, his grip weak and pathetic. "Please," he begged, "vouch for me. Be a good daughter." Lena looked at his hand on her arm, then up into his terrified eyes. She felt a profound sense of release. The fear was gone. The obligation was gone. "I will not lie for you, Richard," she said, her voice clear and final. "And I am not your charity token anymore." She pulled her arm from his grip. Agents grabbed Richard, spinning him around. He began to scream as the metal cuffs clicked onto his wrists. "Ungrateful," he shouted, spit flying as they dragged him away. "You are nothing without me. You are a broken little orphan. You hear me? Nothing." Lena watched him go. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just watched as 20 years of control were marched out the door in federal custody. She felt a warm, heavy hand settle on her shoulder. She turned. Nico was watching her, his face streaked with grime, his eyes filled with a profound tenderness. "Are you okay?" he asked. Lena took a deep breath, inhaling the air that was finally, truly free. "Yes," she said. "I am." The aftermath was a blur of fluorescent lights and sterile rooms. They were taken to a secure federal building. The questioning went on for hours. Nico sat in the interrogation room next to hers. He faced a mountain of potential charges, but the leverage he had provided was undeniable. He had handed the government Richard Hale and the entire leadership of the Costa crime family on a silver platter. In the hallway, a federal prosecutor approached Lena. "Miss Hale," the woman said, "given the circumstances and your father's threats, we are offering you witness protection, new identity, relocation. We can have you in a safe house in Montana by morning. You would be safe from any fallout. But you would have to cut all ties, including Mr. Moretti." Lena looked through the one-way glass into the room where Nico sat. He was leaning back in his chair, looking calm, but she saw the way his eyes kept flicking to the door, waiting for news of her. "No," Lena said. "Miss Hale." The prosecutor warned, "Mr. Moretti is a complicated figure. He is cooperating, but his world is dangerous." "I know his world," Lena said. She turned to the prosecutor. "I am not going anywhere. I will testify. I will tell you everything Richard did. But I am walking out of here with Nico." And she did. 6 weeks later, the city of Graybridge looked the same. But the undercurrents had shifted. The Costa organization was dismantled, their territories fractured. Richard Hale was awaiting trial without bail, his assets frozen, his reputation in ruins. The Moretti organization was changing too. It was a slow, painful process. Nico spent his days in meetings with lawyers and accountants, aggressively shifting capital into legitimate ventures. The shipping logistics company, the construction firms, the tech startups, they were becoming the primary focus. The illegal gambling dens were shuttered. The loan sharking operations were dissolved, the debts forgiven or restructured into legal loans. He was keeping his promise. He was pulling his people out of the darkness. It was a Tuesday evening when Lena stood on the balcony of the new apartment. It was not a penthouse. It was a spacious, warm flat in a historic brownstone in the Hill District, a neighborhood that was neither the slums nor the elite enclave. It was neutral ground. It was home. The French doors were open, letting in the crisp autumn air. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of gold and amber. Lena leaned against the railing, holding a glass of wine. She felt a presence behind her, then the warmth of a body pressing against her back. Nico wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. He sighed, a sound of deep, bone-deep contentment that she rarely heard from him. "You are thinking too loud," he murmured against her ear. "I am thinking about the board meeting tomorrow," Lena said, leaning back into him. "The expansion of the youth shelter is going to cost double what we estimated. The plumbing is a disaster. We will find the money," Nico said effortlessly. "We always do." He turned her gently in his arms so she faced him. The city light cast his face in soft relief. The bruise on his jaw had faded long ago, but the intensity in his eyes remained. Lena looked at him. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Being legitimate, boring?" Nico smiled, one of those rare, genuine smiles that reached his eyes. "I am sleeping at night," he said, "and I am coming home to you without checking the mirrors of my car for taillights." He ran his hands up her arms, resting them on her shoulders. "I used to think my fortune was the territory," Nico said softly. "The power, the ability to make people afraid. And now?" Lena asked. He leaned his forehead against hers. "Now, I know better. You are not my charity case. Lena, you never were, and you're not my possession." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "You are my equal. You are my partner. You are the only family I have chosen." Lena felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming fullness of her heart. She raised her hand, cupping his cheek, feeling the rough warmth of him. "And you are mine?" she whispered. Nico lowered his head. He didn't ask this time. He knew. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss of the warehouse, nor the tentative first kiss in his office. It was slow. It was deep. It was the kiss of a man who had walked through fire and found water. His hands roamed over her back, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. Lena sighed into his mouth, her body melting against his, fitting into the curve of him as if she had been made for this exact space. The danger was gone. The war was over. As Lena smiled against his lips, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart against hers, she realized the truth. Richard had been wrong about everything. She wasn't a case to be fixed. She wasn't a token to be traded. She was a woman who had found the courage to choose her own life. And she had found the man who chose all of her, not to save her, but to love her. And that was the only fortune that mattered. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Lena and Nico as much as I enjoyed writing it for you. It has been an emotional ride from the first spill of wine to this final moment on the balcony. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me where you are listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an upload. Let me know your thoughts on the ending in the comments section. Thank you for your support, and I will see you in the next story.